Hello, welcome back to my van build video series. So I've made videos about many aspects of the build, but there's one big thing I haven't covered yet, and it's what kind of feels like the heart of the build, and that is building out all of the interior structure in the van. So the framing, the cabinets, the wall paneling, basically all of the woodworking and carpentry bits. So that's what this video is going to be all about. Let's go. I framed out and added paneling to the ceiling well before the walls or rest of the van, and the ceiling was kind of my test area to see how the construction method I planned would work and how it would all look. What you see me doing here is bolting a board into the ribs of the van's ceiling. I added relief cuts to these boards which allowed them to bend enough to match the curve of the ceiling. Let's talk more about how these connect. Instead of relying on self-tapping screws or drilling new holes into the van, you can make use of all the existing holes in the van's ceiling and walls. I added a type of heavy-duty threaded rivet called a cross nut to these. The cross nut's size to fit a 1/4-20 bolt fit perfect in the existing holes. With the cross nuts in place, I could use a stainless steel bolt and washer to attach the boards to the ceiling. I drilled a recess so that the head of the bolt would not stick up past the surface of the wood. The nylon washer went on the back side of the board in between the wood and the van itself. Next, I added some additional support members and then got the wiring which runs through the ceiling in place. Most of this wiring is for lights and the fan and a few wires that just needed to pass to the other side of the van. Once the wiring was secured in place, I cut and installed the ceiling panels. These panels attached to the framing with short wood screws. In order to get a clean installation, I made sure to carefully mark and pre-drill the holes for these. Next, I started on the wall framing. I did this in a way that would create posts strong enough to support the bed platform, as well as an inset area in the walls for additional head and foot room on the bed. Before talking about the details of this framing, let's talk about materials. For everything you're seeing in this video, I used Baltic birch plywood. As far as plywood goes, I consider Baltic birch a step above the rest. The inner plies are solid birch veneers cross-laminated. This is what makes Baltic birch plywood stand out, as many other cabinet-grade plywoods use a thin hardwood veneer on the outside, but then a softwood on the inside. These birch veneers are thin and densely laminated and generally void-free, giving a clean, consistent-looking edge no matter where you cut. It's very strong and stable and doesn't warp like so many of the other plywoods. It also has a really good screw-holding strength. The downside is that it's pretty heavy, and even sticking to 1/2 inch, the weight starts to add up. It is a really nice material to work with though. You usually can't find Baltic birch plywood at the big box stores, but most actual lumber and hardwood shops stock it. I used 1/2 inch plywood for most of the build, 3/4 inch in a few spots, and 1/4 inch for the wall paneling. Okay, so here I'm framing out around the window, which I did in basically the same way as the inset areas in the wall at the back of the van. For each of these, I created the top section which bolts in above the window, then the bottom section which bolts into the lower section of the wall, and then once these were both in, I put in the vertical supports that connect the top and bottom pieces. Let's zoom into a few of the details. For the lower supports in the back, I glued together 2 pieces of 1/2 inch material to create a really strong post that could support the weight of the bed platform. In addition to using screws and brad nails, within one of these sections, all of the pieces are glued together to create a really strong assembly. With these in place, I moved on to the bed platform. The horizontal spans here are the one place where I used 3/4 inch material. Once these horizontal spans were in place, I could install the rest of the slats that would support the mattress. The slatted design allows the underside of the mattress to breathe, and this prevents condensation and mold growth in between the bed platform and the mattress. When it comes to the partition in my van, the actual structure of it comes from a real metal partition that came with the van. I screwed on some additional boards where needed to create a cavity for insulation and to support paneling over the partition. I built the doors for the partition from scratch, and I attached them with piano hinges. Next, I started on the cabinets. For the majority of the woodwork, I used methods familiar to me. A mix of glue and brad nails, some pocket hole joinery, and some metal brackets and screws in other places. For anyone who is newish to woodwork, wood glue is great and really strong, and boards solidly glued together don't squeak. At the same time, remember that you don't want to glue everything together. Things like the wall paneling or things you may need to remove later, you don't want to have glued together. The way I built went kind of like this. Let's take a cabinet. I would use glue and brad nails or screws for the joinery of the cabinet itself, but then when installing the cabinet into the van, it's only screwed into place in case it ever needs to be removed later to access something behind it. From here, I continued building out more of the built-in structures. If you have a Ford Transit, then you're probably familiar with this bundle of wires running down the driver's side wall. This is the vehicle wiring harness that Ford leaves out in the open for you to deal with. I secured mine to these wooden blocks, and eventually the wall paneling covered all this up. Speaking of things that are tricky to work around, the Transit also has these foam blobs in the transition between the cab and the back. I didn't want to mess with them, so I just built around them. From here, I added paneling to the remaining sections of wall. I went with this approach where I built out all the structure and cabinets first, and then paneled the walls last. This approach does make it easier to later access wiring or something behind the walls, but it's probably rare that you need to access any of that, and it creates more seams in the wall and is more time consuming to install. The opposite approach to this, which I think might be better and would yield a cleaner look, is to panel out the walls at the beginning and then build out the structure and cabinets after that. Regardless, I was still pleased with how all the wall paneling looked. One more thing I want to talk about is squeaking. Since vans move and bend and stretch in different ways due to the forces put on them while driving, many people ask about squeaking noises between the wood and other building materials. When all was said and done in my van, I didn't have any issues with squeaking, but there are a lot of things that rattle. I think most of that comes from the parts that are meant to move, like the cabinet doors and drawers, but I haven't spent much time hunting down the sources of the rattling. Alright, well that covers everything for this one. Thanks for watching. Check out my other videos, and take care. Bye.